The last thing I remember was the heavy, cold silence in the car after the argument. It was a silence that felt heavier than the world, a silence that seemed to have a life of its own. It was a silence that was shattered by a flash of light. I heard the screech of tires and the sickening lurch of the car. And then, there was just darkness, and the world I knew was gone forever. I tried to call out, but my voice was a ghost. I tried to move, but my limbs were stone. I was floating, completely numb, a spirit tethered to a body I couldn't feel. A feeling of dread settled over me, colder than any winter chill. I knew what was happening to me was wrong, but there was nothing I could do. What would I do now, alone in this endless abyss? The sounds of my family were the first thing to reach me, distant and muffled at first. They sounded so far away. I strained to hear them, to feel them, to know that they were here. My mind, however, was as sharp as ever, a brilliant light trapped inside a prison of flesh. And soon, the whispers began to grow clearer, hinting at a truth far darker than the void itself. The constant, rhythmic beeping of machines was my new soundtrack. It was a lonely electronic song that punctuated the heavy quiet of the room. The smell of antiseptic was a constant presence, a harsh reality that felt at odds with the strange, empty space in my head. I was a ghost, a spectator in my own life, trapped and unable to tell anyone I was here. My family's voices were no longer distant whispers. I could hear my mother's soft, heartbroken sobs and my brother David's voice, strangely calm and level, as he tried to comfort her. My husband Ben was there too, his voice choked with a grief so raw it was almost unbearable. I screamed inside my head, "I'm here! I can hear you!" But all that came out was a soundless echo, a scream swallowed by a silent scream. And yet, there was something in Ben's voice that felt off. I felt a tear land on my cheek, a warm, salty drop that was the only sensation I'd had in weeks. It was my mother's tear. It was a reminder of her love. And it was a wake-up call that I needed to find a way to escape this darkness before it was too late. But the doctor leaned close to my brother David. I couldn't see their faces, but I could hear the hushed tone. It was a confidential whisper, not meant for my mother or Ben to hear. "I know this is hard," the doctor said, "but it's time to pull the plug." The words were so simple, so horrifying. I felt a cold hand grab my wrist, but it wasn't my family's. It was David's. My brother, who was supposed to be my protector, was looking at me with cold, calculating eyes. I tried to tell him to scream, "I'm here, don't do this!" But my body was a tomb. The chilling calm on David's face was a far worse nightmare than the crash itself. He wasn't grieving. He looked relieved. My mother's sobs were the only sound, but Ben's silence was deafening. There was a look in David's eyes that I had never seen before, a look of cold, calculating greed. What was going on? The doctor and David exchanged a subtle glance, one that said more than words ever could. It was a shared secret, a promise of something terrible. I knew in my heart that this was not a simple tragedy. This was something far more sinister. And as they prepared to pull the plug, I knew I had to act, even if it meant risking everything. But how could I act if my body wouldn't listen to me? With every last ounce of my will, I focused on my hand. My mother was holding it, her love a warm blanket against my cold, numb skin. It was the only connection I had to the world. The hospital room changed. The constant air of grief was replaced by a strange, tense quiet. My family visited less often. They seemed to be having arguments outside my room. I could still hear muffled voices, but the words were a jumble, a confusing mess of frustration and anger. The air was thick with it. It felt like I was still trapped, but in a different way. The doctor, Dr. Henderson, still looked annoyed by my existence. He would check my vitals with a weary impatience, his face a mask of cold professionalism. He never smiled. He never looked at me. It felt like he was wishing I was dead. I was no longer a patient to be saved, but a problem to be solved. And a new nurse was assigned to me, a young woman named Sarah with kind eyes and a gentle touch. She looked at me not as a case but as a person. I overheard a new conversation, one that made my blood run cold. It was Dr. Henderson and David, my brother. What they were talking about had nothing to do with my health. It was about money, a lot of money. The doctor was asking for a large sum of cash, and David's response sent a shiver of fear down my spine. I listened, my heart pounding in my chest. Dr. Henderson was demanding a huge sum of cash from David. "You said this would be clean," he hissed. "You owe me for this." I couldn't believe my ears. What did he mean, clean? What did he do? Was my diagnosis a lie? Was my life a lie? A deep sense of betrayal. Sarah wrote a new question on her notepad. "What do you remember right before the crash?" The words were simple, but they unlocked a painful, terrifying memory. I remember a heated argument, not with David, with Ben. We were in the car, on our way to dinner. He was angry. His voice was a low growl filled with a frustration I'd never heard before. He was talking about something, a betrayal, a deal. He kept repeating the word betrayal over and over. What did he mean? The fight was ugly. Ben had a terrifying look on his face, one I had never seen before. He was so angry. I remember the words, but the context was lost. I remember thinking he was going to hit me. I closed my eyes, and then there was nothing. The last thing I remembered before the crash was the look on his face. What was going to happen now that I was remembering? I blinked once for Ben. Sarah's face went pale. She had to believe me. She had to believe that my husband, my partner, was somehow involved. But she didn't know the whole story. I had to find a way to tell her that Ben was the one I argued with. What was he so angry about? Sarah came in with a new look on her face. I blinked to Sarah, spelling out a plan letter by letter. MRI. She looked confused at first, but then her eyes widened. She knew what I was asking for. It was a crazy idea, a massive risk. Dr. Henderson had refused, but it was my only shot. The MRI would show my brain activity, my mind, my will to live. It would prove that I was here. I had to convince her. I had to convince her that this was my only chance. Sarah, a person who had only known me for a week, looked at me with a profound sense of trust. She knew that I was asking her to risk her job. She knew that I was asking her to risk her life. But she also knew that I was a person, a human being, a life that was worth saving. She looked at me, and I felt a glimmer of hope. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do it." But how could we get Dr. Henderson to agree to the MRI? I knew I had to push. I had to make her understand that this was my only chance. But there was something I hadn't told her yet. A piece of information that would change everything. A piece of information that would expose the lies. I was ready to play my last card. What would she do when I told her about the safe? Ben came into my room, a stack of legal papers in his hand. He was on the phone with his lawyer. He was talking about legal Sarah came into my room, her face pale. She had a copy of the papers Ben had signed. She had a friend in the hospital legal department. The papers were not about my care. They were not about my life insurance. They were about my will. Ben was changing it. He was writing me out. And he was making David the sole beneficiary. I was not just a walking ATM. I was a target. And they were going to do it. I felt a cold hand grab my throat. This wasn't about money. This was about power. This was about a family that was so broken, so twisted they would rather kill me than let me live. I was a burden, a problem to be solved. And the problem was me. I had to find a way to escape this hospital, this tomb, this prison. But how could I escape if the people who were supposed to protect me were the ones who were trying to kill me? I blinked, spelling out a word on Sarah's notepad. Safe. She looked confused. "What about a safe?" she whispered. I blinked again. Study. She looked at me, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Sarah came into the room with a new look on her face. She was ready. She had a plan. "I'm going to tell Ben that I found an old computer of yours," she whispered. "I'm going to ask him to help me get the password." My heart pounded in my chest. It was a risky plan. Ben was a smart man. He was a master of lies. He would know something was wrong. But it was our only shot. We had to take it. We had to expose him. We had to get the truth. She left, and I was alone again, the beeping of the machines my only companion. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt a wave of fear, a cold, empty feeling in my stomach. What if he didn't believe her? What if he figured it out? What if he tried to hurt her? I had put her in danger. I had made her a part of my story, and I was terrified. The door opened. It was Ben. He was alone. He looked at me, a strange look in his eyes. He said nothing. He just sat there. Was he going to kill me? Was he going to hurt Sarah? I had to find a way to warn her. But how? What would I do? Sarah came back, her face pale. She had the password. She had a copy of the report. I used my blinks to tell Sarah the plan. We were going to go to the press conference. We were going to go there and expose them. We were going to go there and tell the world the truth. She looked at me, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "This could be dangerous." I blinked once for yes. It was our only chance. We had to take it. We had to expose them. She made the arrangements. She talked to the hospital security. She talked to the hospital media relations. She told them that I was awake. They were all so happy. They were all so excited. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't know that I was going to expose them. I was going to tear down the world they had built. And I was going to do it in front of everyone. I knew that this was a risk. I knew that they would be angry. I knew that they would be scared. But I also knew that they were in for a world of pain. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. I was a warrior, and I was going to win this battle. But I was not prepared for what was about to be revealed. The press conference was a blur of flashing lights and microphones. My family was there, their faces a mixture of forced smiles and nervous energy. Dr. Henderson stood at the podium, a smug look on. Susan began to confess, her voice a low, terrifying whisper. She was a woman who had been wronged, a woman who had been betrayed. She had been waiting for this moment. She had been waiting for this moment for years. She had always hated me. She had always hated that I had my father's love, my father's business, my father's respect. She had wanted it for her son. And she was going to get it, no matter the cost. She talked about the family business, the one I had inherited from my father. She talked about how I was going to give it to David. She talked about how Ben was not going to get a single thing. She was a woman who had been wronged. She was a woman who had been betrayed. And she was going to get her revenge. She was going to kill me. She was going to get her revenge. I was not just a victim. I was a survivor. I was a warrior. I was going to win this battle. I was going to expose her. I was going to expose them all. I was going to make them pay. I was going to do it. But I was not prepared for what was about to happen. Ben, David, and Susan were arrested. They were all taken away in handcuffs. I was out of the hospital. I was home. The house was empty. The lake house was empty. The business was empty. It was a ghost town. But it was my ghost town. I was a survivor. I was a warrior. I was a queen. I was going to get my life back. I was going to get my family back. I was going to get my business back. I was going to get my life back. I had so much to do. I had to rebuild my life. I had to rebuild my family. I had to rebuild my business. I was a survivor. I was a warrior. I was a queen. I was going to get my life back. I was going to get my family back. I was going to get my business back. I was going to get my life back. I was going to do it. I was not alone. Sarah was there. My mother was there. They were all there. They were all there to help me. They were all there to love me. They were all there to support me. They were all there to love me. I was a survivor. I was a warrior. I was a queen. I was going to get my life back. My physical recovery was almost complete. I could walk and talk again. I could live again. But the emotional scars were still there. They were a part of me now. They were a reminder of what I had been through. They were a reminder of what I had lost. They were a reminder of what I had won. They were a part of me. I had a new purpose. I had a new family. I had a new life. I had a new business. I was a survivor.